Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cop Talk. I'm Kevin Schroeder, your host, and I'm here with my co-host, Captain Ed Mamet.
Hello, WABC listeners and YouTube viewers. Here we are again with another interesting guest.
So today's guest is John Beatty. John is a 19-year NYPD vet, and he also is an attorney, John Beatty Law. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Captain. Nice to see you guys. Big fan of the show.
Thank you, John. So why don't you tell our audience about yourself?
So I come from a police family. My dad was not a policeman, but I had many uncles. I have many cousins that were in the NYPD. I came on in October of 1990. My brother-in-law was up in the 3-4, which is where I wanted to desperately go. It was a wild place at the time. There had been several big shootings up there. And unfortunately, my sister worked with Robert Morgenthau's son and made what we would call a contract, and I was sent to Central Park. So I started my career in Central Park. Still, it was a tough place. Stephen McDonald had recently been shot there. The Central Park rape had just occurred the year prior. And I stayed there for 2 years, and I was constantly getting into trouble, going into outside commands, Midtown North, Kevin, where you used to work, up in Harlem, Spanish Harlem. And I was threatened with suspension if I was found outside.
Let's just rewind. So what do you mean you were going into Midtown North? What were you doing
So
there?
I was going in there looking for arrests. The park was at times a very quiet place.
Poaching, okay.
Poaching, yes. And so what happened was my post, and I'd heard a prior guest say he had the Museum of Natural History. My post at one time was the Metropolitan Museum, which I loved, right? It was sort of my first exposure to the culture. And I tried to give a ticket to a taxi driver in front of the museum, and he tried to bribe me. And I thought, oh, boy, if I take this, this could be big trouble. So we went through the whole rigmarole, and I brought him back to the precinct, and we got mic'd up, and he tried to bribe me. And as a reward for my not accepting his bribe, I was offered any precinct in the city. They would reassign me to anywhere. And a buddy of mine had just gone to Brooklyn North, to the 8-3 precinct in Bushwick, the 83rd precinct. Now, I grew up in Queens. I was born in Brooklyn, grew up in Woodhaven, Queens, which was kind of a rough and tumble place. The chief of detectives, Joe Kenny, and I went to grammar school together. A lot of tough guys, grew up in the Gotti era, a lot of Gambino crime associates, a lot of guys going to jail, a lot of murders, a lot of death. So anyway, I didn't want to work too close to home.
And what precinct was that, Woodhaven? What precinct?
102.
102, okay.
But also into the 7-5, into East New York, city line.
Brooklyn, okay.
Right, it borders Brooklyn right there. And so the 8-3 seemed like the perfectly logical spot. And just fast forward, so I was there for a few years, got into anti-crime, running around, young guy for guns and all that kind of stuff. And my mom, at 52, died very suddenly at our home. And just what made it even more tragic was that my brother, who was graduating the police academy, she died on a Saturday, he was graduating that Monday. He was home with her, with another young recruit whose own mom had passed away similarly. So it was just a terrible scene. At the funeral, everybody from my precinct came locally, and one of the chiefs, who, unbeknownst to me, was my mom's cousin, had just retired as the chief of personnel. And, of course, he was kind enough to say, "Kid, is there anything I can do for you?" And I asked to go to the mounted unit. And Joe Esposito, who was the chief of department,
right,
famous Joe, great man, he pulled me in his office. He said, you'll be back. You're a crime fighter.
What was the chief's name of personnel?
I didn't even want to say it, if that's okay, because it involved some movement. I'll tell you off the air.
Okay.
And he's a gentleman. He was always a gentleman to me. And he said, I don't understand why you never asked me for this before. And I said, I didn't even know who you were. When you're a young guy, you don't know who the upper echelon are all the time. So I went to mounted. I got promoted out of mounted after a few years. I made sergeant in 1998. And I actually got back to Brooklyn North at my request. Joe Espo was able to put me back in the 9-0 for 6 months, Williamsburg, and then move me over back to the 8-3, where I stayed again. I've been transferred in and out of the command 4 times. And just before I retired, I had been passed over for lieutenant a few times. I was injured. I had a few shoulder surgeries. And I thought, well, if I get back as a lieutenant, I'll set the record 5 times. And unfortunately, I was compelled to retire because of the injury.
So when did you come on the job?
1990.
90. And when, it's okay. So, and you went up to the rank of sergeant, correct?
I was a sergeant, correct.
Okay. And then, okay. So you retired. Did you do 20 years?
I did 19.
Did 19. And, you
And
went
so
out with injury.
what happened was I was trying to stay on. I guess just before 9/11, the year before, I applied and received the sole scholarship to Harvard University. That Commissioner Kelly had gone himself, and they gave 1 a year. Now I believe, thankfully, they give more than 1 a year. But I went to Harvard for a year on behalf of the NYPD. And when I returned, I had to work up in OMAP to pay back the scholarship. And I ended up in the commissioner's office, which I believe may have been, it was just before Bernie Kerrick, maybe Commissioner Safer. And I wrote the police commissioner's briefing to the mayor. It was part of my duties, but I wasn't happy. And my downfall was that I then wrote 2 op-eds, one in the Post and one in the Daily News, that police were underpaid as a policy matter. I took what I had learned at Harvard and spun it back on them. And that didn't sit well with the police commissioner.
So you started in Central Park.
Started in the park.
Right. And then you wound up finishing your career where?
I finished, I guess it was out of the legal bureau.
As a sergeant.
As a sergeant, as a managing attorney. I came back from Harvard's Kennedy School. I was in the building in police headquarters for maybe a year or so. And this is what I'll talk about later is I was injured off duty. And there was a lawsuit resulting out of that injury. And that's what compelled me then to go to law school. And also the fact that I thought I'd be terminated for writing these articles, that we were underpaid, and that very similar to today. If I put them on the table in front of us, you'd say, "Gosh, when did you write this? Yesterday?" So many people are retiring. The retention problems are horrible.
Yeah. Well, Captain.
You know, you mentioned 3 commands that I worked in. We must have crossed at one time. I was executive officer of the 9-0 precinct. I was executive officer of the 7-5 precinct, and I know Brooklyn North very well.
Yes.
So we must have crossed paths. We never met.
Correct. Well, probably a good thing for me at the time, right? There would be no need for us to meet.
Very good thing from what I understand. Very good thing.
No, I was like you. I was a bit of a maverick. So I think we would have gotten along very well.
I didn't know him on the job either.
Anyway, can you tell us a good PD story?
I have so many. I'm one of these guys. I'm no hero. Let's just get that out of the way, you know. But I was young, and you want to change the world. I ended up as any cop who worked with really good men and women. I had a great crime team, and for people who don't know, right?
Anti-crime team, right? Plain
the
clothes.
anti-crime is when you wear plain clothes, and in theory, you drive around in an unmarked car that everybody knows what it is, and you try to catch bad guys by surprise. And
today they call it, I think, what do they call it?
Public
Anti-crime.
safety.
it's
Public
public
safety.
safety. They wear khakis, and
Is that what they
very
do?
nice.
Have
Yes.
in uniform, whatever. I was in Midtown North anti-crime. Not to jump in here. What we used to do is anti-crime Midtown North. We weren't just answering radio runs and backing up everyone, which we did as well.
Right.
But we were following pickpockets. We were making pickpocket, arrests.
Absolutely.
Out and out robberies. I mean, it'd just be amazing. Back in the late '80s, early '90s, what was going on in Midtown in regards to pickpockets as well as the robberies.
Yes.
Street robberies, and that's what we used to do. I mean, so not putting anybody down today because they do what they do. It's a different time, but to me, that was anti-crime, which was
They are
now
still
I think they call it
rocking and
public
rolling
safety.
out there. I don't think it gets a lot of publicity. We've come to a point now, and we can hash this out. But also when I was in Mounted can be a very effective unit. I mean, they're very well trained. We really, I think, could bring a lot of these demonstrations not to a close. I'm a lawyer. I believe in the Constitution. People have an absolute right to protest. Taking over bridges, taking over streets, disrupting communities, causing damage, wreaking havoc. That's another story.
Right.
But the job historically has always been very reticent to utilize mounted. They have us parked 10 blocks away, out of sight. The chiefs would never call us in. Even when officers were getting injured, doing hand-to-hand battle, it made no sense. Sometimes even the fear of a horse, at least controlled, right? That you could utilize it to reduce officer injuries and injuries to people in the crowd, if they know that things are not going to be allowed to get out of hand.
Well, Curtis Leawood talks about it constantly. And I remember the early on, my early time in the career, 1962, it was 1961, the UN General Assembly was riotous. That's when Khrushchev came, Castro came.
Yep.
And Mounted was out there, and they did a phenomenal job. And that was my first exposure to Mounted. I always wanted to go to Mounted. And I wound up becoming a detective instead.
As the captain said, Curtis talks about a lot on his show in regards to Mounted. We're not utilizing Mounted like they should be. But we've been saying it, and I've been saying it here on the show from day one as well, when all these ridiculous protests were happening. Where is Mounted? They're nowhere to be seen, nowhere to be found. They're there. They got them a few blocks away. They're ready to go. That's what they do. Disperse the crowd. That's what they do. But they didn't use them. Doing the BLM.
The unit,
and
when I got there, the reason it was such a big deal was there were probably thousands of applications. It was one of the places people really wanted to go.
What troop were you in?
I began on 42nd. And
Troop B.
Troop B, 42nd and 12th, back in the old days when it was still a busy place. No gorgeous condominium complexes. It was the piers, right?
Yeah.
Rough and tumble. And then I served in Tribeca. And then
is that Troop A down there? Troop A by the
Troop A,
first
correct.
precinct?
And then Troop G, which was in the 102 precinct for a short time until they got rid of it.
Okay.
And I made some arrests. I was an active Mounted guy. I love that. But going back to a police story, there's somebody I'd like to give a shout out to. Is in crime, we went to what came over as a burglary call, Bushwick Avenue, and it was just myself and another officer, Patrick Rodrigo, and Patty became a sergeant. Tough guys, and Pat Rodrigo and his partner for a long time, Izzy Arroyo, were two of the best gun guys that I've in the police jargon. There's some people who have a real talent.
Yep.
And in any event, we go into the house, and I open the door, and there's a guy with a gun. Two senior citizens clearly had been thrown down a flight of stairs. Most of the houses are these railroad apartments, right? And so two guys split up, and guy goes in the back, and the guy I chased into a rear bedroom was an absolute monster. He was 6 foot, whatever. He was on New York One News, because somebody go back and look at the footage. He was a huge guy. The other guy ran down to the basement. And the guy I chased, and back then I was a little skinny, wiry guy, was kicking out the back window. It had a security gate, and he was trying to kick his way out, and he couldn't. And I had him at gunpoint. But all the time, I was always conscious, even back then, of having a bad shooting. With a DA, the Brooklyn DAs were legendary as well, even after Liz Holtzman, about prosecuting police officers. So it was always in the back of my mind. And in any event, the guy jumped off the window and jumped on me, and we fought over my gun. And I would credit Pat Rodrigo for coming back into the room and helping me subdue this guy after a pretty vicious brawl. Turns out this guy had been in Attica for 7 years. Had just been released less than a week prior. He was in for another home invasion. He comes home, back to Brooklyn, goes to a funeral or a wake, and someone says, "Hey, I think I know a spot that's got some money." And it was an old woman's house. They thought her son was involved in the drug trade and there might be money. The old man died shortly after. But Pat Rodrigo, I think, honestly, that's probably the closest. I'd never been in a shooting. The team made dozens of gun arrests. But we talked a little bit earlier, if we're going to talk about the Detective Bureau.
Right.
I have the utmost respect, really, for the detectives. I was this cop, like Barney Miller, the cop, the white shield, who used to go up to the squad all the time. That was me. Mike Zeller, Chris Monzert, Dominic Vassatoro, Kevin McKeon, Redbeard. Tough guys, really genuine, caring people, ahead of their time, I always thought. I had a great deal of respect for them. But the schedule for detectives was atrocious.
Right.
It was very difficult. Home life, if you made an arrest.
Right.
It
And back then, too, grade wasn't given out like it is today. And a lot of those guys retired third grade, and most of those guys should have retired first grade.
So I'll tell you, in the article that I wrote, I think in the Daily News, one of the things I wrote was another detective there, Jack Goggin, Joe Roman. Many of these guys are dead from 9/11 cancer. He was working in a shop, let's say it was the Gap at night. Now here's a guy in Brooklyn North investigating homicides in the daytime. And at night, he doesn't make enough money. He's got to go put on a blue jacket and stand at the door trying to catch shoplifters. And I thought that was another detective, I won't mention his name, had a lawn mowing business. And he was mowing lawns of Suffolk and Nassau police officers in his off time when he would come to Brooklyn North and investigate homicides and very terrible crimes. And I thought, boy, no wonder, there's a talent. There's the drain, right? That's why the talent is leaving. Why would they stay? So anyway, shout out to the A3. It's a very, very tight command. It always has been. There's a reunion coming up, and there's a couple of guys that are facing some very severe health consequences like they are in every command and every detective squad in the NYPD and elsewhere.
Cap.
You mentioned anti-crime. Anti-crime began in 1972. At the time it began, I was a sergeant in the Brooklyn 10th District Robbery Squad. And some chief said, "Why are we calling it anti-crime? Is there anything else you can call it?"
My family used to say, aren't all police officers supposed to be anti-crime?
ACU. Yeah.
Anyway, what made you go to law school?
So I was I was a motorcycle rider, not one of these young guys racing around. I had a nice cruiser, Indian type motorcycle, and I was in an accident on 7th Avenue approaching the 1st Precinct down towards Tribeca, and I broke my leg pretty badly. Had surgery at Bellevue and a plate and screws, and I really thought there was a chance that I could lose my job, that I could be pushed out. And I worked very hard to get back into shape. But I thought, geez, the guys who created this, it was a hole in the road. Turns out I did my own investigation. I didn't even know a lawyer. I hired Mike Daly. His brother-in-law was a lawyer in Howard Beach, and I hired him. And the two of us put together that they'd known about this for a long time, kept talking about trying to fix it. No one ever fixed it. And sure enough, at that time, by the time it came to trial, 9/11 had happened the year prior. I had returned from Harvard. I was about to get promoted to lieutenant. So you couldn't ask for a better time to be in front of a jury because we all know there are times when, as a police officer, we're not the most popular folks in the city. And so the case resolved, thankfully, and I went on with my life. But I thought, it was scary when the commissioner called me and said, you might lose your job. I was with Chief Ali, the chief of detectives at the time. He was a gentleman. But there was a real feeling that because I wrote without authorization from the police department that I could be terminated. And there was a time where the administration, Mayor Giuliani and others, their policy was, well, fire him and let him sue to get his job back. But that's a major deal, to take someone's livelihood after putting in all that effort was a problem, and I was nervous. So I decided to go to law school, and I was accepted to several schools, but I elected to go to Fordham in Lincoln Center because they had a program at night. So I worked for the NYPD during the day, and graduated Fordham with honors. So it was a great. I can't say enough great things about it. It's a great institution.
John, can you talk about some trial cases you have ongoing or past you'd like to speak about?
So my practice, I think, always lends itself to personal injury, right? That's all I do. And a large part of my practice, though I do no advertising, right, is the police universe. Not just active officers, retired officers and their families. I've helped detectives' mothers and brothers and sisters and lieutenants and chiefs and some very high, well-known people in our city but I wouldn't you'll never see me say, oh, I represented, right? I have a moral and ethical obligation not to disclose that sort of stuff. But so I represent now the police. The detectives union asked me to assist with the family of a retired
NYPD,
the NYPD,
DEA. Okay.
DEA at the time. They great credit to the DEA, to Scott and to his predecessors and all of his board. Some of whom I worked with in Brooklyn North on the street. All great guys and gals. They now have a woman up in the Bronx. She's fantastic. They're very forward-thinking, but their motto, they never forget, right? Like a Marine, they just never forget. And they had a retired detective whose daughter was tragically murdered up in Orange County. He was Dennis McDonald. A year after he retired, he passed away. And his daughter was murdered allegedly by her boyfriend. And it turns out, it's an interesting case, and I can only disclose so much of it, but the district attorney now was at one time a criminal defense attorney. And we believe that a piece to the homicide came into his office and offered to give information. And the DA, then the lawyer, took some steps to work out a deal. And there's a lot of other stuff. But he went to bat for the guy. And then he was elected DA and never recused himself. And so the family for 15 years has suffered, right? Maybe the case could have been solved 15 years ago. The perpetrator was recently arrested. I say the work of the state troopers involved. The DEA went to bat as well. They went up and handed out flyers and got involved. An arrest has been made, and there's going to be a trial in January 2025. So I represent that family, just their interests. They're not looking for money, but the goal is to get to the bottom of the investigation. And I'll note, the second highest ranking guy in the Orange County District Attorney's Office, it's District Attorney David Hoovler, who is a real, pro-police on paper. His second in command was accused. I accused him, as the others, of failing to recuse themselves. He ended up getting accused also in a bribery matter in the last 2 months. And I'd say maybe about a month and a half ago, the FBI executed a warrant at his home, and the second time they went back, he shot it out with the FBI and the state police, and then, at least according to what I've heard, took his own life. And so that's the Orange County District Attorney's Office. So in that instance, it's not a personal injury case, but who can be more injured than the family of a homicide victim, especially an NYPD family?
Right. And I know at one time, Detective Dennis McDonald, the father of the girl who was killed, worked in Midtown North Detective Squad.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So,
and if I may, just touch on one other topic. There's a bill before the governor. It's called the Grieving Families Act. And I don't want to get too much into it, but basically, most people don't know when they talk about tort reform, most people don't understand that the life of someone who's retired or the life of a child is worth almost nothing in New York State. New York and Alabama are the only two states, if you can believe it, that don't compensate families for the emotional loss of a loved one. So again, if you have a child that's on the job or old enough and you don't support them anymore and something happens, your broken heart, it means nothing under the law.
nothing.
And so the reason I bring it up is I represented a detective's family in a personal injury case. His mother was a vibrant woman. She tripped and fell and suffered a brain injury and tragically passed. And I had to explain to this multiple detectives, some of, in the family. And I had to say to them, I understand it's the most preposterous thing, but your mother was retired, even though she volunteered and she drove and she helped the kids. Her life under the law, as it stands in New York today, is worth literally almost nothing. It's a pecuniary formula.
Doesn't the same thing apply to disabled children and other
Absolutely.
people? The theory is that they have no earning capacity or they have no worth.
Absolutely. And quite frankly, it affects the people who need it the most, the disabled community. I think, Kevin, I don't need to tell you this if you're going to get into Arms Wide Open, and all the work that you have done. And a huge shout out to you. It's how
Thanks.
kind of we got to know each other pretty well.
Yeah, true.
Is you, and Stephen, and the work you do for the foundation, and helping. I am injury counsel to the NYPD's Foundation for Developmentally Disabled Children, started by Merritt Riley, the PBA trustee of Manhattan South, who's a phenomenal human being,
Right.
and my cousin Dan Sprague, retired detective who was a pipe major in the band, and they do phenomenal work for these families. And they had the foresight to say, there's so many parents out there, and if you're listening and you have a child, and you don't need to work for the NYPD, they've broadened it now where they'll help any family.
Right.
They
True.
work for the city. If you have a child on the spectrum, or you don't know who to turn to or what to do,
Yes.
or I've helped families with birth injuries. I mean, there's a lot of information out there. So if you're listening to this, reach out to Arms Wide Open. But Kevin has personally helped raise millions and millions of dollars for them.
We have our annual event coming up soon, December 20th at the Mandarin Hotel, Stevie Van Zandt's Little Stevens Policeman's Ball, which half the donations go to With Arms Wide Open and also the DEA Widows and Children.
Right.
And this will be our 10th year, actually, and in almost 10 years, we've raised over $2 million.
It's unbelievable.
So Stevie's been great, pro law enforcement, military, he's been great. I break his shoes on other things, but as far as law
He's an
enforcement,
amazing
he's
guy,
great.
really.
No, he's
truly-
great. He's great.
If you've
He's
seen him
great.
in the 60 Minutes interview, and
Yeah.
he's really a
he was just
Renaissance
nominated
man.
for a Grammy for that, documentary.
I just
Yeah.
I just read that.
Yeah.
But he's such a neat guy. I've only met him, one time.
Mm-hmm.
But he's really, and then that's the greatest story ever of how you and he
Yeah, yeah,
got together.
exactly. True. Interesting story. So, John, you do a lot of other work with other police unions as well, besides
do.
the DEA.
Formally, I don't, meaning I don't represent that I work for the union. But I represent so many members of the Lieutenants Benevolent Association. Again, John Beatty, Lou Turco.
No relation, right, Beattie?
No
John
relation
Beattie.
to that John Beatty, handsome guy. I wish I was. But again, and I'm not disparaging the union leaders from when we came on. But even the profession itself has advanced, as it should,
Yeah.
and our labor leaders have advanced, and they seek to provide information to their members. They're open. I know them personally. Scott Monroe, of course, the president of the
Great guy,
DEA.
Scott. Yep.
Lou and John, I've had discussions with. Their openness to helping their members is what the union is supposed to be about. I mean, they have a lot of stuff to deal with day to day in this political climate, but the fact that they would go the extra mile, and they do, for the guys and gals, it impresses me. Whether they utilize my services or not, it's just something that I love. And as a cop who didn't have information once when I really needed it and felt like I had nowhere to turn, I would be proud. I'm part of the SBA as a retired guy, but both of those unions are phenomenal and at the forefront of what they do.
Now, are you licensed in any other states, practicing law anywhere else?
I'm licensed in Massachusetts, so I spent a lot of time up in Massachusetts after Harvard. I go back up there. And if I could just double back a quick story. When my mother died, I was in Boston. We had planned to go to the St. Patrick's Day parade one year, and it was snowed out. And so my hotel voucher expired the following March. I went up with a friend, and while I was there, my mom passed away. And once, when I was on the desk in the A3, a police officer from Puerto Rico came in and goes, I don't know what I'm doing here, but my dad just died in PR. Can you guys help me out? And I get a little upset about it. But we took him lights and sirens, got him on a plane, got him home. And when I was in Boston, young guys came to my hotel room, but it was 10 o'clock at night. No trains, no planes, no buses, nothing. They came back the next morning, took me to the airport, got me on the plane. I had my weapon. In those days, you could still do it. John Boyle is his name. And John is a friend of mine for 30 years now. Came to my wedding in California. Just to talk about the police universe.
True.
It's some really good human beings.
It is. It's
Yeah,
a
it's the
great.
same worldwide. I've been in Australia, New Zealand. Same thing. You'd think you were back in New York City.
It's unbelievable.
The concept is the same.
And they came here. I brought them here. They brought money for 9/11. I mean, it's always been a reciprocal relationship.
What's your thoughts about what's going on today with the New York City Police Department and law enforcement in general?
You know, it's funny. I love when you ask this question, and I think, Joy, what would I say if I was ever asked? To your point about policing internationally. So I had joined as a young guy the International Police Association, which in essence, right, is cops from all over the world come to New York on holiday with their families, and we take them around and we show them around, and then they reciprocate.
Right.
And it's true. Wherever I have been to almost 30 countries. I love to travel. And I found that it's the same everywhere, right? This is a thankless profession a lot of times. It's an amazing, the people that you meet are amazing, the things you get to do are amazing, but you are tasked with almost an insurmountable assignment, right? We can't be everything. We're not the cure for what's going on. We didn't create these situations. We're triaging things. I mean, look at cops today. When I came on the job, right, we used to give psychological first aid. If someone was shot on the ground, I'd say, hey, hang in there, buddy. I can hear the sirens coming. Now you've got officers coming back from war, from combat, who are triaging, tourniqueting, Narcaning, using potato chip bags to close gunshot wounds right there on the street. And yet, the police can't seem to get a leg up with the public, right? You remember walking out of 9/11? I never forget it. Walking out of the pile, people lined up on the West Side Highway, right, for 2 blocks.
Very true.
I thought, boy, this ain't going to last.
That's what I said. It wouldn't last.
And it didn't.
Right.
And I understand. Look, I believe Harvard is Harvard, and whatever you want to say about them. But I will say I met some very quality people there in my class, military guys, law enforcement from all over the world. One of the guys was a professor, was a Metropolitan Bobby, right? He was over from London PD. And he had a saying that was, identify a problem and fix it, right? We have a problem. We have a problem with immigration. We have a problem with immigration and crime, right? The correlation of those two things. I have people that have been injured here in the city that call me and say, oh, I was run over by a bicycle. I was hit by this. There's no means of recovery because there's no means. I've talked to detectives. What about, we don't even know who this guy is, right? He's got 7 IDs. And talking about traveling all over the world, I love people. We all do, right? I love chatting. There's not a country once that I went to where I didn't have to produce my identification, where I wasn't subject to some sort of, hey, who are you? What are you doing here?
Right.
I was in Argentina for an extended period of time. My wife and I had to take a ferry over to Uruguay so that our visa would not have expired, and we got our paper stamped and then went back and extended our visa. Today, there's just this and you know this better than me, right? Kathy Hansen was on the job, her husband dying of 9/11 cancer. I can tell you, and I'm just one guy from one precinct. I know 100 people personally, more, probably hundreds, that have been affected in some way by 9/11 illnesses. Yeah. And they're either turned down, right? They haven't elected to identify their diagnosis as being covered. And here we are, even the concept of saying, well, let's give these people just cash without any sort of baseline of what they're going to do with it. Let's give them ID cards. Let's give driver's license. Let's just, we have to know in our sovereign nation who's coming in. And I welcome my grandpa, right? Do we all not come from immigrant families? But they came in through Ellis Island.
Right.
And they say, well, if you're coming here to say I'm in danger, go to the port of entry. State your case.
Right.
And, I mean, clearly, on the federal level, the immigration system is broken. On the local level, it's broken. And I don't know what to do. If I was a young officer today, I think it's even harder. And every generation can look back and say, gee, like you were talking, right? There were the BLA shootings in the 9th Precinct. There were a lot of the FALN. there's always been bad things, and tragically, there's always been police officers putting their lives on the line and losing their lives. Right. And today, I just feel like something's got to give. Something has to give.
You know, speaking about 9/11, we speak about it all the time on this podcast. You know, someone, a first responder dies from 9/11 illnesses. Their family has to fight for the benefits they deserve. But climb over the wall, you get whatever you want. I mean, where's the justice there? You know?
Yeah, I mean, look, these are complex issues, right? So I knew a Navy guy who was dealing with pirates outside Somalia. And he'd say, boy, things in Somalia got to be pretty bad if you're willing to jump on one of these rickety boats and try to attack a ship that probably has some now security personnel, post-military guys on it. And the places that these people are coming from, right, they're coming here because they want a better deal. Most decent, good people, right? But if you can't discern, we've got, right, we have a gang unit. The NYPD's got phenomenal intel, right? We know that they're coming in gangs. We know that they're doing these are not just one-off street robberies, which in and of themselves are terrible. These are organized fraud rings. We're signing deeds to houses, right? We're taking houses from senior citizens fraudulently. There are armed robberies. I mean, there's a lack of fear of the police. There's a lack of respect for police. The assault in Times Square. I mean, I bring my children to Times Square periodically to see a show or something. Times Square has gone. We're sliding back. I mean, we've slid back.
Absolutely. You know?
And now there's that sort of feckless, like, I don't care. I don't even think they care, because when I walk through, they must know that I'm, because I won't back down and I stand up to them. And there's just an attitude, sort of a sense of lawlessness. And as an attorney, I believe in the rule of law. We have to, for everyone. I just got back from Ireland. I didn't just walk in. You stop, you pay a little money, and you show your papers. I mean, I know you had somebody from the Superior Office Council from Nassau and Suffolk.
Right.
He said it's the craziest thing. I just went to vote in the presidential election in my town, and I had my driver's license. The lady says, "You don't need that." I go, "What do you?" I would need this to buy a pack of cigarettes, right? It's bananas.
Very true.
Jack, as a lawyer, I wanted to ask you this question. Trump says that he's going to conduct mass deportations. Now, that's a big thing. I don't know how he's going to do it. But do you think that the local police can be deputized as ICE agents and assist in helping get rid of these illegals, especially the criminals? Because we know that eventually they come in contact with the police for various reasons: traffic violation, criminal matter, aided case, for various reasons. What's your thought on that?
Well, first, I throw a caveat out, right? I'm not an immigration attorney. I'm not a criminal defense attorney. Again, it's a complex issue. Number one, I don't know that, I guess in theory they could be deputized. That's been done before, right? We have officers working with federal...
The Joint Task Forces.
Joint Task Forces. And at some point, I'd like to just tell an anecdote about that, too. But I don't know. I mean, number one, I don't think our system can handle it, right? Who knows how many are even here? And there's a lot of, whether it's the ACLU or whoever it is, that would step up and say, well, we're not tasked with that. It's not supposed to be our job. And quite frankly, if you know anything about how the NYPD operates today, they're so understaffed. You've got detectives, again, or even patrol officers going out, doing their jobs, and then being mandated to go stand on a subway platform for 4 hours, whether they need to get home or not get home. I know overtime has been talked about on your show, but it's the same thing. I joked in one of the op-eds I wrote that they should replace the doors. They had just put in new doors on police headquarters. They were revolving. They should just rip them out to make it easier there were so many retirees running away from the NYPD. I don't think they can handle it. I honestly don't think that the NYPD has the manpower to handle it. And logistically, it's just, it's like a non-starter.
Well, the feds could pay the overtime.
Well, then you might see some interest, but I think it's just going to cause a tremendous. Again, I don't know. I believe from what I've read on my personal time, there are these issues about maybe using other nations, and then there are other. Italy has begun. They're getting a lot of people from Albania and these African countries where they're saying, wait, how about we stop everybody in Albania, set them up there, and then have Albania review their applications before they get here, right? That can stem the tide. But this just opening the doors. I mean, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand, or a policy wonk, to say that that's an impossible thing, to bring tens or hundreds of thousands of people from another country into our sovereign nation without any sort of oversight. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, we had the local director of ICE here some time ago, and he said his hands are tied because what was once an executive order has now been codified into law in New York City, where the police department cannot get involved in any way with immigration matters. Now, in my time, when we suspected someone who was here illegally, we would hold them and call INS, which was on the Immigration Naturalization Service, and they would come and pick the guy up, and we'd never see them again. That changed with Koch. Koch issued an executive order saying the police will no longer get involved in immigration matters. And de Blasio, to his discredit, introduces a law to codify what was once executive order. So we're stuck. Right now, we can't, when I say we, the police can do nothing. And the ICE director here, he was absolutely frustrated.
Yeah, and to that point, and who's stuck dealing with this for the most part? Police officers on the street. And the citizens of New York who have to either be accosted or are victimized by the crimes committed. And again, I make it clear, we all know that not every person who's come to this country, whether they overstay a visa or they walk through when the gates were open, are coming here to commit crimes intentionally. They're coming here for a better life. But there are so many that were criminals in their country, right, as the president has announced repeatedly, whether they were released from hospitals for various reasons or they have. Look, again, do you need to be a cop to walk around New York City and see the result of mental illness and people not being able to be hospitalized or get the treatment? I can only say I don't have the answers, but I do know one answer is that the answers that they've come up with so far are not working.
Yeah. Why don't you run against D.A. Bragg? We'll start the campaign today.
A friend of mine from law school, his sister ran against Bragg. I think she was even more to the left of the district attorney.
Oh.
Look, I have my own problem with DAs, not just because of the case I'm working on now, but DAs want wins, right? They want a prosecutable case that they are almost guaranteed to get a victory so they can go off and brag about it, no pun intended. Many times with police officers, if you know this, even where the officer, and I think I was a fairly articulate guy, you would chase a guy with a gun, think this is it. You got your gun out, you're rolling around, and then you go down to the Brooklyn DA's office and they DP it. They decline to prosecute the case. And you're like, what am I doing, right? What is this for? And somebody say, don't worry, kid, you'll get him the next time. He's going to do it again. The system's imperfect.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you still got your number in your overtime, but still.
Correct.
It's a DP,
As an officer,
which is not
got
good.
it.
Right. Exactly. Fundraising. I know you've been involved, and we touched on fundraising before with Arms Wide Open. Right. Any other foundations you're involved in?
Predominantly, it's Arms Wide Open. I like to support the Little Stephen.
And you do. I mean,
and I do. Very small.
Let's touch on that. So, how's the guitar going? So, Cap, we had a golf fundraiser.
It's a golf outing.
And golf outing fundraiser. Little Stephen's Policeman's golf outing.
Correct.
It was our second annual. But our first annual, about a year ago, Stevie signed, autographed 2 guitars. And one of them, John Beatty, Jack Beattie, purchased.
Great.
It's up to you if you want to say it's up to you, but it wasn't cheap, and I think Stevie and you are going to get together for dinner soon.
We'll have
between
but then
your
he went on
schedule and his
tour. I mean,
schedule.
he's a busy man, and I
Yeah.
said, I really, truly, I would love to sit with him for a little bit. And he spoke. And look, here's a guy. He has the deserved wealth to live anywhere he wants. He's a New York guy. He's a Jersey guy, right? He commented, and he's like, look, I'm a pretty open-minded guy, right? He's an artist. And he said, I see a difference. I see a difference in our city. Yeah. And the question is, like, I came up, right? We grew up in the 70s, rough and tumble, graffiti. I showed my kids pictures of what a subway car used to look like. Their heads exploded.
Yeah.
I'm worried that we're getting back to that without being, like, alarmist. It's like the city smells very much like urine and marijuana. Yeah. And the idea to make marijuana legal, again, what you do in your own home, or if everybody just chewed a gummy, I wouldn't care. But the smell is overwhelming. And I don't think it's good for business. I have a law firm here in Manhattan. My office is down on VC Street. And, it's the same quality of life. If I can just talk about that. I was a cop when the Be Cop is Back came around, right? We all recycled the wheel. We got back to people should know their police officer. And if they knew their officer, it would be a wonderful relationship, right? A symbiotic relationship. And I was a cop on the beat in Bushwick. I got an award, actually, from Commissioner Kelly, a savings bond. I couldn't believe the police department would give money.
Really?
But I got like a Community Cop of the Year award. And it wasn't just me. Maybe they gave one in every command or every borough at headquarters.
Was that the CPOP program?
It was the CPOP program.
Community
CPOP
Police
is
on
back.
Patrol. Right.
Right.
Community Policing on Patrol.
Right. And I was the first, Commissioner Bratton, or maybe it was Ray Kelly, who brought the 9mm. Bratton. And a guy in my command didn't pass the test, and then I was second in the queue to get it, and I got a 9, and I was out there walking around, and I loved it. And anybody listening from the A3 would know, like, I called for help a lot of times. But here's what people forget. They would say, why are you enforcing this law, Beattie? We drink on the steps, so we do this, and what's acceptable, right, or what would have been in that community, or people would have you believe should be. The working people get up every day, and they go to their jobs, and they want to come home to a safe, decent place, and they're deserving of that. And what people forget is we've gotten a little too far, again, getting into the Constitution. Criminals, yes, everybody. The defendant's chair is the loneliest chair in the world, right? Ask Daniel Perry. But we've forgotten about victims and potential victims. And so all the decent people, the only thing I can say is, please, you have to get out and vote. We're not voting, and that's why the city council is the city council, and it's why Bragg may get reelected. It's because we need people, good people, to get out and say, we can't continue this way. We simply can't.
It's horrible. And like you mentioned, Times Square, which was a mess, and then under Giuliani, the NYPD cleaned it up. Under Giuliani, NYPD cleaned it up, and now it's going back to the way it was. I mean, it's a shame. Times Square is a mess. And
I wrote in one of those articles again, talking about Joe Espo. He used to say all of his cops, the department were his grunts, and they were frontline guys. And I don't care who, Jack Maple, to all his credit, anybody who created these policies, someone has to put those policies. Someone's got to go out and put their hands on people,
right,
and get dirty. And it's a dirty job. It can be. And you talk about the asphyxiation. Again, do you need to be an attorney to say this is bananas? How can you how can you subdue someone who doesn't want to be subdued? By the way, I mean, what would you think when you were cops? If a guy is going to stand up to me and I'm standing there and I represent authority and I've got a firearm,
you're in uniform.
It's like this dude's going to take me on. Who knows what he's capable of?
Right.
And all of these cases, if I can just point out, you know this already. Every single case involves someone who was non-compliant across the country.
Absolutely.
If we can get the message out that says, look, okay, if you feel the cop is overstepping his bounds or you are in the right? We were told this years ago. Just put your hands behind your back. Now, I know it's an imperfect system, and there's a ton of people who might say that that's...
At that moment, comply. And they have... three-quarters of these problems will not happen.
Correct.
They won't exist.
90% probably.
Probably
And-
90%.
But if you want to take off in a car at 100 miles an hour through Ozone Park or St. Anne's in the Bronx, right?
Yeah.
I mean, can that be tolerated? And then the cops are at fault for chasing and trying to terminate the,
Right. So he already, or the perp already resisted arrest. So when you catch him or her, game on. I mean, he's not going to say, okay, I give up. I mean, that's TV. This is reality. on the
Literally, I
street.
would think to myself and be like, boy, what is this guy running from? Why won't he just turn the car off?
Yeah.
And you have to think it's
Yeah.
it's because he's worried about and he's
Yeah.
not going to go back, or she.
Right, true. Cap?
How can our listeners and viewers contact you?
So if you just Google John Beatty, Beatty, like Warren Beatty, if you just Google John Beatty attorney, I think my firm comes right up. It's John Beatty Law, PLLC. But if you just type in John Beatty or NYPD, John Beatty attorney, my website comes right up, and you'll see some of what I've done. And my cases are limited. I don't do 9/11 work at all. If you're a police officer injured in the line of duty, and I don't know how much time we have, but I just wanted to bring up one thing I am looking into on behalf of officers is Mayor Bloomberg began this green initiative, which was then continued by his successors, including Mayor de Blasio. And as part of the green initiative, they started buying all of these hybrid or electric vehicles, which is okay, fine, great. Give them to the buildings department, give them to the Department of Finance. What they've done is they've given them to police officers now. And they doctored them up. They put a light rack on top. They put a computer and unpadded things in the console. They're not police cars. They're not manufactured to be police cars. They're not put into the stream of commerce to be police cars. It's putting lipstick on a pig. And what I am finding, I've got millions of dollars for police officers injured in what we call RMP accidents, right? Radio Motor Patrol car accidents, because they are in vehicles that, say, for instance, Ford has a police car lineup. They sell police cars to municipalities. The city of New York, in its infinite wisdom, has gone around that to buy green vehicles. And police officers are getting very, very seriously injured. And they don't even know that they're in a car that's not supposed to be a police car, right? So that's something I'm working with the unions on, getting that message out.
Yeah.
And hopefully, getting the NYPD to take another look and say, well, maybe this isn't a great idea. How can we save resources in another area? How can we use, I had an officer involved, she was hit in a hybrid vehicle, T-boned by a garbage truck. I mean, she had catastrophic injuries. And I got her almost, I think it was $4 million. I mean, and I've got cases now. I have multiple officers injured in separate accidents. In the Ford Mustang is a new, goes 0 to 60 in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
It's soundless, right? It makes no sound at all. And these cops are getting hurt. It's a terrible thing.
Now, these injured police officers we're talking about, are they coming through the union to you, or they come in by
I think
themselves?
they'll Google, I have
Okay.
information on my website about this. Sometimes they'll go to the union. Sometimes it's word of mouth, right? I've represented a lot of police officers.
Sure have.
And they'll say, hey, Frank, who did you go to? Susie, who did you go to? And she'll say, I went with John. And quite frankly, look, there's a lot of fine personal injury lawyers. I think what makes me different from most is I was an investigator, and I handle every case like an investigation. Going back to the anecdote, when I was a young cop, I wanted to be in the FBI NYPD Joint Bank Robbery Task Force. Just seemed like was something I wanted to do. And I was never afraid. I called the CO of the unit, and I said, could I buy you lunch? And he's like, who is this? He was a lieutenant or a captain. And he met me at John Jay. And I said, what's the secret to investigating bank robberies, He said, it's the secret to investigating anything, right? Who, what, why, where, and when. Are the cameras? Who was there? Talk to them. Separate them. You figure it out. Is there a pattern? So I'm friends with Joey Herbert, right? The Zodiac killer,
Yeah.
right? All of these brilliant detectives really share one thing, a great deal of common sense.
Right.
Right.
Common sense, right.
And that's what makes a great detective, and that's what makes a great patrol cop.
Yeah. Cap, you were a detective, weren't you, before you became a boss?
I was a detective for many years. In fact, I worked closely with the FBI's bank robbery task force.
There you go.
And I learned from them.
He got in.
There you go. You got
He
it.
didn't take him to lunch either.
I was a sergeant at the time, in the robbery squad.
John, I know it's John, and I call you Jack.
Yeah, so many people call, I go by Jack, but my law firm is under John Beatty,
Okay.
and most people outside of the NYPD know me as John.
So one more
including my
time,
family.
your how can people contact you?
So you can look my firm up on the interwebs at John Beatty Law in New York, and you can call my office if you'd like. I have a staff and appellate counsel. The number is 212-540-4111.
Again?
That's 212-540-4111. And my email and all my contact information, my cell phone is 917-797-9520. It's 917-797-9520. And the reason people say you're crazy, you give your cell phone number out, I do. Because, right, just like the NYPD, this is a 24/7 operation. I've gone to ERs when cops got hurt. I've gone to their homes or hospitals the day after when they call. It's a boots on the ground kind of thing. And I think that's the key, really, to my success has been getting out there right away, right? What scene can you go to a week later and if you really want to preserve evidence and find witnesses?
True.
It's something that's got to happen right away.
True. Cap?
Well, I think this has been a great interview.
Thank you very much.
I'm very impressed with your background and your service to the community.
Well, thank
I'm
you.
sure Kevin is too. And hopefully you'll get things done that have to be done.
Yeah, I hope so.
It's
And I
nice.
thank you both, for
Wow.
it's been really, I listen to the show all the time. I love
Thank
you
you.
guys. You do a great job. And I just want to say a shout out to my wife, Whitney, and my children,
Of course.
who allow me to work so hard for other people. And they appreciate what I do, and I appreciate them. And, of course, I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
John, Jack, but we'll say John for the
John,
record.
Jack, whatever is what they
John, you've always been there for law enforcement. You've always been there for anything I personally asked you for in regards to getting involved with any fundraiser, whether it be Stevie Van Zandt or Arms Wide Open or Widows and Children or anything. You've always been there, always a step ahead. So I personally thank you for that. So does Stevie. Thank you for that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
And, and we appreciate you being here today. I know you're a busy trial attorney, so hopefully everyone out there who listened today, they wrote down your name and your number, and if they, God forbid, they do need something, you're the man.
No
So,
one ever thinks they will, but then
You never
phone
know.
doesn't stop
Exactly.
ringing.
It's always good to have a good person.
Thank you.
Absolutely. But thank you, John, again for you. Everyone, John Beatty, I call him Jack, but it's John Beatty Law. If you need anything in regards to personal injury or maybe even some advice, feel free to give him a call.
Absolutely.
He's always there to help. Believe me when I tell you. At this time, I'd like to thank everyone for listening. If you like what you hear, you could subscribe to Cop Talk. And if you want to follow us on X, it's at Cop Talk WABC. That's at Cop Talk WABC. Captain?
As Kevin usually forgets to say, we're also on YouTube.
At this time, God bless you. God bless law enforcement throughout the world. And God bless America. Till next time, be safe out there. Thank you.